All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. I think the only announcement today is that we are accepting submissions for the Harvard Award. I think they're due on March 23rd. So if you're a doc student or a master's student, we invite you to apply to that. And so we're gonna go ahead and get started, please. Oops, sorry guys, I'm really struggling. People on Zoom, can you see the slide?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Today is a pleasure to present my work that I am developing in my team that is about disparities in tobacco use at the intersection of sex, age, race, ethnicity, and income among U.S. adults. So I want to say first, thank you to my collaborators in this project that are Rafael Mesa, Jana Hirschich, and Nancy Fleischer. Thank you to all of them because they have provided great feedback. And we are working in this project about 2 years. And also want to say thank you to Lindsay Kobashi. I take the class 617 and her class was also inspired this project. So I want to say thank you to Lindsay. Finally, also want to say thank you to all the helper team that always is there helping, providing feedback and supporting in many ways that I feel very privileged to work in this amazing team. So I will start with this slide that show conceptual framework of why it's important to study intersectionality and tobacco use, particularly disparities in tobacco use at the intersection of multiple identities. The intersectionality theories posits that health inequities, not only tobacco use, are generated by the interlocking systems of oppression like racism, sexism, classism, and these generate health inequities, and particularly in tobacco use, this conceptual map, you can see that this interaction of systems of privilege could lead to individuals to different psychological impacts in each individual that could lead to have more stress or feel less powerlessness. And for sure, these intermediate outcomes lead to tobacco outcomes, negative tobacco outcomes like higher prevalence, higher smoking dependence or tobacco dependence, and less likelihood of cessation outcomes. So they posit that in this paper that was put in this conceptual map, they say that there is a need to have more empirical data that can explore disparities not alone, because in tobacco use there is a long history study disparities by sex, disparities by race, ethnicity. Both are not together, and the intersectionality is more who you are a person with a race, ethnicity, with a sex, with a gender, and that's more holistic framework. So there is a need to explore more in deep that. And we try to respond to this. And our team, we just published a paper in the nicotine and tobacco research that is about this using disparities in cigar, and smokeless, different tobacco products at the intersection of these variables. But our project have more objectives. Our aims of this project, we have 3 big aims. First, we develop an interactive visualization tool for tobacco use at the intersection of multiple identities to analyze data and provide a detailed characterization of prevalence. And the first paper that we published was about prevalence of cigarette, cigar, and smokeless use. But we have 2 more papers that we are developing. The second is about flavor, flavored tobacco prevalence, that for cigarettes we have menthol and non-menthol cigarettes. And for other products like e-cigarettes and cigars, we have 4 different options like tobacco, menthol, sweet spicy, and other flavors. And finally, we have a third paper that is about dual and poly tobacco use using this intersectionality perspective. So these are our 3 big aims. And today in this presentation, I want to show the interactive visualization tool. But before, I want to present some slides and some examples of how look the figures. So before to do that, I want to share that we use the QS CPS survey. That is one of the most largest national representative surveys in tobacco use in the US population. And we define tobacco use as current product use. It means that people who respond in the survey that use these products every day or some days were classified as people who use these products. But for cigarettes, we applied the established use of cigarettes. That it means that people need to respond that also smoke more than 100 cigarettes in their life. That was our definition for each tobacco product. But for example, for the second paper for the flavor, we define menthol and non-menthol cigarette use with the following question: do you usually smoke menthol or non-menthol cigarettes? We classify according to the response in menthol or non-menthol cigarette use. And finally, with these 4 products that I present, we create 5 groups of dual and poly tobacco use groups that are mutually exclusive. We have one of cigarettes and e-cigarettes. We have one of the second one, cigarettes and cigars. The third one is cigarettes and smokeless. The 4 is poly-use with cigarettes. Poly-use means that it's using 3 or more products. For example, could be someone who uses cigarettes, cigar, and smokeless. And finally, the 5th group is dual and poly-use without cigarettes. For example, someone who uses e-cigarettes, cigars, and smokeless, or someone who use cigars and smokeless, or the combinations that can be there in this combination. So with these definitions of tobacco use, I also want to present the intersectionality definitions. We basically choose 4 sociodemographic variables that we believe that are very important, that are age, sex, race, and ethnicity, and annual household income. Age we divide in 3 groups. 18 to 34 are where young adults, 35 to 54, middle-aged adults, and 50 or more years were our 3 groups. We have 2 male and female, and we have 4 groups of race and ethnicity: non-Hispanic white, non-Hispanic black, Hispanic, and non-Hispanic other, that include all other race ethnicity groups. So we also have 3 groups of income: less than $50,000 that we label as low income. We have the second group that was between $50,000 to less than $100,000 that we label as medium income, and more than $100,000. We use these cut points based on previous literature that our group published in tobacco use, that basically these cut points are close to the tertiles of the distribution in the surveys. So the statistical analysis is really straightforward. The QS-CPS survey have weights and also have replicate weights, and we take into account, and we with this estimate weight prevalence of the different tobacco products, and also dual and poly tobacco use at the intersection of these variable of age, sex, race, ethnicity, and income. And we create our visualization tool in R, and our R code are available in the paper that we published. There is an appendix, but also if you are interested in reproduce our figures or doing something, you can contact us and we can share the code. This is like how looks our variable when we create the variable of 72 categories. The results of doing the intersectionality results in these 72 categories that you can see here. There are 24 groups of low income, 24 groups of medium income, and 24 groups of high income. The first one, for example, are female, non-Hispanic, white, age 18 to 34 years. And one thing that I want to highlight is that the QS CPS survey has a sample size of more than 130,000 observations that allows to have a statistical power to do this analysis and to have these 72 categories. So the mean of observations in each category was about 2,000 observations, with the least observation was for male, non-Hispanic, Black, 18 to 34 years with high income. We have 142 participants in this category. And the category with the highest observations were female, non-Hispanic, white, 55 years or more, with almost 50,000 observations in this category. So this is how our visualization tool looks for the prevalence of cigarette use. And in this first visualization that are called circular bar plots and are the same 72 categories, and they are sorted by income, the low, the medium, and the high income, and are sorted by levels of prevalence. And I think the first thing that is easy to identify is that income is a very important factor for cigarette smoking. You can see that people in overall with low income have higher prevalence than people in the groups with medium or high income. And that was the first thing that is easy to identify. But the other thing that we start to discover is that when you explore the cigarette smoking prevalence alone, for example, the highest prevalence that we found was among low-income adults, that the prevalence was 15.7%, not using the intersectionality approach, using the estimating the prevalence stratified by income. But using this intersectionality approach, we found that, for example, this group that are male, non-Hispanic, white, middle-aged, 35 to 54 years with low income, have prevalence of 30.6%. Now, one thing that was also, you can start to do comparison with this graph, is that there are some groups in the first four groups, female non-Hispanic white, male non-Hispanic other, and male non-Hispanic Black. These four groups of the population have the prevalence of 24% or more, and that was the prevalence of this survey in 1992 in the US population. So it means that there are 30 years behind in tobacco control, these four groups. And that was also very important finding that we believe, because currently there is a lot of the literature about the end game of the cigarette smoking epidemic. These groups are very far from the end game. You can see that there are groups that are close to the end game, like this group with the lowest prevalence with high income is female, non-Hispanic, white, 35 to 54. The prevalence are lower than those 2%. So these groups are close to the end game, but there are groups who are in the 90s, and there is a need to do policies that can help these groups of the populations that are behind in tobacco control. The other thing that we found is that having higher income, I don't know why here using the Google slides, I don't see all my animations, but I will try to because in my Google slides I have some marks, but what we found is that having higher income is a protective factor for all groups, but is less protective among some groups. For example, and I want to put here that this group that I don't know if people in Zoom can see, but male Hispanic 35 to 54 has a prevalence of 13%, but this same group that is male Hispanic with high income have a prevalence of 8%. So the prevalence of the low income group is 1.6 higher than the prevalence of the high income group, the same, only changing the income. And it's 1.6 higher, so it's protective. But if you see, for example, the same example for male non-Hispanic white, 35 to 54 years, that is 30.6. If we found the same group that is here, male, is here male non-Hispanic white, 35 to 54 years, the prevalence is around 7%. It means that for high income, the prevalence of low income male non-Hispanic white is 4 times higher than the prevalence for high income of the same group. This means for some race ethnicity groups, income is more protected than others, and this is consistent with the diminished theory, return theory, that posits that some minority race ethnicity groups have a less protective effect of income. So what's also interesting. The next example that I want to, and finally, as I said first, there is a high variability intra-group, and this is also really interesting. Here I go. So the second graph that I want to present is the same prevalence of cigarette use, but including flavors. I want to say before that here the menthol are the people who use in green, and in this gold, brown are the people who are using non-menthol cigarettes. So you can see the same groups, the same prevalence, but the proportion of the people who are using flavors. I show this visualization to the former FDA tobacco branch leader that came to Michigan in the fall. And he told me, he provided me full feedback, and he said, that is good because you can identify the groups that could be benefit from a flavor menthol cigarette ban. That is very easy to identify. These groups of male non-Hispanic Black or female non-Hispanic Black with low income not only have a high prevalence, but the proportion is more than 70% of these groups are using menthol cigarettes. So that groups are really, could be really benefit from a menthol cigarette ban. But there is also other thing that is important. There are groups in which menthol use is not high. So what I ask, what do you think about what is the policy, the tobacco control policy that should be implemented to help this? And he responded me that he thinks that from the FDA perspective, the policy that should be implemented to these groups is to reduce nicotine in cigarettes. So it's like, well, this visualization tool helped you to understand different policies and how to target. And he told me that was good for policymakers. But I think that looking this visualization tool, what I also see is that there is a need to tackle structural causes of tobacco use. Like, well, if income is very important, increasing income and providing opportunities to have a better socioeconomic status could be an important factor. As well, we know that there are other structural causes of tobacco use that need to address, and I think when I see this figure, I think on that too. So I also put here in red, all of these groups have higher proportion of menthol cigarette use, and maybe will be the groups that could be the bigger benefit of a menthol cigarette ban that the FDA are trying to implement, or at least has the intention to implement this ban. So this is now another product. This is the prevalence of PCR use, again from adults in the US. So here is a little different. The prevalence is, of course, lower than for CRUs, but we also found interesting findings. And I think one of the most interesting findings that we found, for sure, we expect that younger people, younger adults have higher prevalence. But one of the things that we found is that 6 of the 10 groups with the highest prevalence of PCR use were also in the low income group. That using this intersectionality perspective was a little different that some other papers have reported. So you can see the group with the highest prevalence were male, non-Hispanic, white, young adults with low income with a prevalence close to 9%. But there still 6 groups of the 10 were low income groups. And then we have also young adults, male, non-Hispanic, white, with and male non-Hispanic other with middle income in the top 10. And there is also two groups with high in the top 10 that are in the high income group that are male Hispanic young adults and male non-Hispanic white young adults too. What I see with this is that, and we receive feedback, and I will present in the when we submit this to the reviewers, is that the reviewers suggest, well, this looks good, but maybe you need to sort in a different way this graphic, because for income was very important CRUs, but you need to sort in a different way to try to see by age. The patterns looks better, given that it seems that age is the most defining characteristic that is driving the prevalence of CRUs. The other thing that I want to highlight is that you can also see that there are no groups of non-Hispanic, Black, or people over 55 years over in the top 10 categories. So very low prevalence among these groups of the population. Now I want to present, these are the 10 top groups that are highlighted in red. And as I say, 6 of the 10 were in the low income group. Now I want to present one of the examples of the dual and poly use, that is dual use of cigarettes and cigars. And for me, this is like, because dual use of cigarettes and cigars is lower than 1% in the QS-CPS, but there are 2 groups that are disproportionately affected by the use of dual use of these 2 products. And you can see that there are low income, male non-Hispanic, Black, young adults and middle-aged adults with a prevalence of 3.6 and 2.7. That are the 2 groups that you can highlight easy. And I think that these 2 groups, having this result, you can hypothesize that dual use is really important in these groups, not only in the prevalence, but also that can help you to explain some of the health outcomes difference that are in terms of mortality. You can hypothesize like if these dual use have impacts on health outcomes. So was also really interesting finding. But when we, as I mentioned before, when we submit the paper, we have very good feedback in the NTR journal. They say that we present in a intuitive way the patterns, but one of the reviewers say it is unclear why all 4 figures were present by income as a primary organizing social identity factor. It seems appropriate for cigarettes, since appear to be the primary organizing factor for that product. However, for e-cigarettes, the primary driving appears to be age. So others ask, what is the rationale for presenting intersectionality by income? I wonder if by age or race ethnicity. So when we receive this feedback, at this time, we submit all the figures sorted by income, and we don't have yet the interactive tool. But when we receive that, we say, well, people want for all the things sorted by different things. And that makes sense because people for each product is different. So that's why we developed the interactive visualization tool, that we create an HTML file that allows to see the readers how tobacco products vary when the results are displayed by age, sex, race, ethnicity, as well as income. So I will put the visualization tool. And here again, we have the figure of cigarette use. You can see here, we put the level of the variables that I present to you. And it's the same cigarette use by income, but you can put here and go and present how look the smoking patterns by if you put in the middle age, and you can see that middle-aged adults have in overall higher prevalence, or you can see the how looks by sex or by race, ethnicity too. And one of the comments was by cigarette use, that we have this by income, and people say maybe the best way to visualize is by age, and I agree that there is age looks better because you can see how people, young adults, have the highest prevalence of e-cigarette use, and people with 55 plus, the prevalence is 1% or lower. The same for cigar use. One of the things that was unexpected is that we don't see a big difference by income in the use of cigar use, and the prevalence of cigar use by income. But I think that looking by race ethnicity, sort by race ethnicity was really interesting, and we found like race ethnicity in the case of cigar use was one of the most defining characteristics. So that here you can see how cigar use is focused on non-Hispanic white males, and also in non-Hispanic Black males, particularly are the two groups, and particularly middle-aged. So that are the groups in which cigar use is still high. And that is the last product that we have in the paper, that is smokeless use. And again, for income was not the best way to visualize smokeless use, but using by sex or by race ethnicity, we identify that smokeless use is high independently of income in non-Hispanic white, young and middle-aged adults. That are the groups with higher prevalence of the smokeless. You can see many groups with the prevalence in the non-Hispanic Black, in the Hispanic group, and non-Hispanic other, in which basically smokeless use is so low. So this is the visualization tool that we create, and we are doing the same for the second and third paper, that is the flavor and the dual and poly tobacco use, that you can switch the view. And as I mentioned, we have the code available to reproduce these figures in the paper. So I will go back to the presentation. So we acknowledge that this study and this project have limitations, and several limitations, but I think the most important limitation that we have is that in the intersectionality framework, there are relevant variables like sexual orientation, mental health condition, disability status, that we don't have in the QS-CPS survey, and I think that that's an important limitation. Also, that the QS-CPS is a cross-sectionally study, and we only put data from 2018, 2019. We don't know how was this before, but other than that, I think that our study helped us to uncover complex patterns of tobacco use, that the statistical analysis is not complicated, it's easy, but the visual part allows to the identification of high-risk populations that otherwise will be masked or will be complicated to look. So we think that this information is important for surveillance, as I discussed in the visualization of flavors, to help you to target tobacco control policies, but also this visualization can lead to different hypotheses to the different groups that are affected by the different tobacco products. So our next steps is continue with the publication and dissemination of these findings. And we also are thinking with Nancy in trying to apply for a grant to going with this exposure category of intersectionality. The US CPA survey has the advantage that you can link with mortality data. So there are many things that are not well understood about disparities in mortality in lung cancer, that maybe because there have been not explored with this holistic approach of intersectionality, and we want to do for that in the future. But is all that I have for the presentation for today. I really enjoy to share this, and please, I am open to any question or suggestions here and in the Zoom. So thank you so much. Yes.
Nice. Yes, I think, I'm sorry for coming in. I was on the phone, I broke them up, sorry, you don't pick up the phone with them. So thank you for this. I had a lot of questions, but I guess I'll start. Like, one is like, I'm wondering, to what degree do you think these like smokeless workplace policies are like behind some of the income differences that you showed today? Because I think, you know, I know that's, I missed the very, very beginning, but I presume this is either household income or income among people who are working. So either way, sort of, I guess I'm wondering about how policies related to workplace. And then if there's other data, I know this is data just from more recently, but if there's other data to suggest if those smokeless workplace policies have increased the income disparities since 92, which was like I'm choosing that year just because that was the kind of benchmarks. So that was like my first question.
Well, you are right that we measure the annual household income. Like, I think I also have doing these graphs using education, and that still is worse. You can see that you put education instead of income, is worse. I don't put education because we need to restrict to 25 because some people are still studying, but I don't know. I'm not sure about your question if it's like the policies of at work, but I think that many things that happen is that people with low income have a very easy access to tobacco products because there are a lot of tobacco retailers at low income communities, and there is also less access to healthy food, to many things that are affecting this rate. So, so I believe that was the reason that I think that these graphs suggest that you need to do to the structural causes of tobacco and going beyond tobacco control policies to try to address. But for the data, I'm not sure.
Well, I think, thank you for that. I think it raises another issue, which is the other thing I was thinking about with your age group. You know, that your 18 to 34-year-old group, your 18 to 22-year-olds or whatever, like those are relatively new smokers. You know, like
Sure.
25, 30, 34, those are people who've been smoking for probably at least a decade, you know? And so what made me think about workplace then is like, it's not about where somebody getting their first cigarette. You know, it's about like, nicotine forms dependence. And so it's like, how hard is it for you to continue to use cigarettes during the day? And if you work at the University of Michigan, you
Yes.
know, like you need to go to a place where there's some, like, you know, you're not on campus, right? Because we're a smoke-free campus, right? Or this hospital area is, right? So I think, I guess that's what kind of got me thinking is like that first age group is really a mix of relatively new smokers and established smokers, and then your middle age group is definitely established smokers. And so
Yes.
meaning like that, where are those people? Like they're at work.
That's a great suggestion, like, because sometimes we try to put the 18 to 24 and the 25 to 34 to
Yeah.
try to see this difference. But if you put 18 to 24 and 25 to 34, you need to have, instead of 72, I think that because everything is multiplied, you have 100
I see.
and too many categories. But maybe one way would be to restrict to 25 plus, and because we have still enough sample size, and doing also by educational income, because in this way, I think you can use education also or income, like measures of socioeconomic status. But I agree with you that 18 to 24 and 24 to 34 are young adults.
Yeah.
But are different in the terms of the smoking behaviors in a stage. Yeah.
And my last question is, do you have, I'm sorry, that's the very beginning. So this is daily smoking, that's the outcome?
It's current product use and not defined as everyday or Sunday use. But in the data set, there are also measures of intensity, frequency.
Because I think that might be another outcome that you could show, which I think are beautiful, and visualizations are really cool. And I want to, my other questions for how you did that, but I'm going to stop asking questions. But that intensity of use, because I think that might also really, because that's where you're going to be able to differentiate, especially within that younger age group, somebody who's developing. I mean, nicotine dependence, just the risk continues to go as long as you keep using, right? But if you've got people who are, if lower income people in the youngest age group are more likely to be nicotine dependent, that's a very different type of policy recommendation, I think, than it, you know, because that it's like that intensity is happening so much earlier in the life course.
Yes.
Versus, you know, people in their 50s who are smoking. I don't think you find a smoker in their 50s who wasn't nicotine dependent. Like that, at that point, it's done, you know, so. Anyway, so that was my other, that's good that you have those.
Yes, there are, for example, for cigars, I think it's also very important because many people don't smoke very intermittent cigar use. It's needed to have like, well, this is a problem, but after you adjust or you take into account frequency and intensity, patterns could be different and identify a more established use. For cigarette smoking, we have the established use in our definition. That means that we are only including people who smoke more than 100 cigarettes. That you can also derive the variable without the 100 cigarettes for young adults in the US. But we are using the established use for cigarette use, at least to have don't have a lot of experimental people who are using cigarettes, but we have a lot of experimental people who in the other products. But the thing is that if you don't include it in some, also the prevalence of some products is very low because the way that they are using the other products. So that's thank you. Yes.
Oh, yeah, just I had a follow-up question on some of what Bree was saying. Do they have, if you do they ask about occupation?
Occupation, I think so. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, it just could be interesting because, you know, it's something I don't think talk quite as much about in the US, but I think, you know, thinking about class or occupation,
Yes.
some of those things, I was struck with the non-Hispanic, white, low income,
Yes.
just wondering like sort of what occupations those are. And, you know, that's also policy relevant, thinking about, you know, where people are smoking.
Yes.
And then urbanicity, if you could do urban rural, I don't know if you have that in USCPS, but that
Yeah, I think so. I think rural urban, yes.
Yeah, we have quite a lot of geographic information in TUS, which is why we used it to look at different policies, including smoke-free policy and how smoke-free policies affecting cigarette use at the intersection of single identities instead of multiple identities. Um, So I recall when we were working on the paper, which has been a while, which is why I don't remember all the findings off the top of my head, but we did explore, like, I think we explored if they worked indoors or not, for people, because we did see differences by age group, because we did stratify by age. And we looked at workplace policies and hospitality policies. So I believe they at least have some measures of
Yeah.
work. I don't know if they have like occupation that you could code out, which I'm not sure about that. We're doing a lot of occupation and industry coding in our COVID work, which is fun times, but yeah, I don't know exactly about that for TUS. But the other thing I want to say to respond to Bree is that there's a series of papers that have just come out in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine that was led by the CISNET group, Raphael's lung cancer group. And it does basically age period cohort differences by income, by education, by race, ethnicity over time. So you can see how how the patterns have changed based on like time and cohort.
Yeah.
And I think it is true that like with the ton of new tobacco control policies, it wasn't just smoke free, it was like taxation and like a lot of things happened at the same time. Starting, in the late 90s, basically, that disparities have grown.
Socioeconomic disparities and then
Yeah.
also potentially in other.
Yeah, I mean, I think it like depends a bit on the product and
Sure,
depends,
yeah. Yeah, because I mean, in some ways, like you think, the other thing I was thinking about during this presentation was, who has incentive to reduce smoking? And like beyond the individual who often are dependent, because this substance is a high dependency. And like workplaces, if they have an insurance policy, like have a strong incentive to get workers to stop smoking, to reduce tobacco use. And so, whereas like obviously like the tobacco companies have zero incentive, right? And so, and I understand like regulators can do certain things, but like it also seems like if there's a way to connect with like private enterprise essentially, and like when I was looking at visualization, like, oh man, I wonder if somebody who, like, for example, like this one who uses menthol cigarettes, like how would they respond to seeing this video? Like, would that be a useful thing to show or not show, just to kind of help them understand a little bit more about like, how this, because this is obviously kind of a broader story about marketing and like where, et cetera. So
and even like a very racist history of why menthol cigarettes are still on the market.
yes, exactly, right. But then on my back of my mind, I landed back on, right, that they're physiologically dependent on nicotine. So like, this is actually not useful for them, but it might be useful for like union leaders to see, or to other, like people who are like engaged in workplace and have a potential like dual roles, or like employee assistance programs or other things like that, to kind of say like, look, this isn't about like, punishing non-Hispanic Black men age 35, whatever like that, who are using menthol, but right, like that this is not randomly distributed, and you shouldn't, like, if you have like a universal policy towards things, like you're potentially gonna like widen disparities, but here in our, if our workplace has a lot of men, right, if it's an occupation that's, to your point, James, about like it's an occupation that's predominantly men or a large proportion of men, like that might be a need to have a different approach that would be salient, so that.
I mean, I think a lot of the population level approaches in tobacco have like kind of played out.
Yeah,
I think like now,
yeah,
it's more about what's appropriate for different groups.
Yeah.
People.
I see some things in the chat.
Can you read it out loud to us?
This is an interesting political history of the cigarette by Sarah Miller. She traced how anti-smoking policies have been taken up by different groups over time. Thank you.
I know that some workplaces like charge more for health insurance for employees if they smoke. So, which is like, again, more of a punitive thing for the individual rather than the like system trying to change that, right?
Right, yeah. I mean, I'm remembering back to when I worked at Kmart, and like we had people, you had a break room in the back and like, this was a smoke-free workplace at the time, not that old, but like, people went out and smoked, and so I think there is, I could see. There are like opportunities, like, I mean, again, it's not that you're gonna get somebody to stop smoking right there, but like, if whether it's like incentivizing replacement strategies or, yeah, but by the time they're in the workplace, they're already, especially with your data, and you're looking at daily users, and so you've got these very high prevalence, even on younger people, right? So I mean, that's part of it too. This is just experimenting.
I don't know if someone in the Zoom has any question.
Can you talk to us about how you made the visualization?
Yeah, like was one day that I was telling at the beginning that I did 617 with Lindsay question, the data of intersectionality. And there is one paper that is really nice about methods, but they don't have figures. But when I start first with the prevalence, with the categories, and this is not easy to communicate when you have 72 categories, a big table. It's not interesting. And so one day I start to do experimentation, and there is a blog that have a lot of figures so far. That is, how is the name? R Gallery.
Yeah.
And I start to look, and I see these circular bar plots, and I start doing experimentation with Nancy, Rafael, Jana, and the helper team, and improving these two over time. And that was one day was ready to share. But one day in a meeting, I shared to Nancy the idea, and we start to work, and now we are comfortable with it's not a hard code, surprisingly. It's an easy code and I think it's also for many dichotomous outcomes, like you have prevalence, it works well, and you want to also some continuous outcome like obesity. I think that it will be good to do that. We have also a plan to expand to other health outcomes that are important for the intersectionality theory. But I did like a talk in the Nancy group with the code, and the code is there. I'm happy also to share the code is not. I'm not an R person. I am a data person, and I am learning R more for the graphs.
Yeah.
And it's not complicated as you think at the beginning, but it requires a lot of experimentation and make mistakes and go back.
This is our innovator. You're gonna see these plots everywhere now.
I'm selfishly asking, so we started our advisory student, we had a Venn diagram in our figure, in our paper, and they said, we don't publish Venn diagrams. Like, how do you like not publish a type of thing? It was insane. It was kind of, but now I'm like, well, all right, I gotta figure out some other way to visual. I don't think this, but like, I was like, oh, well, that's kind of interesting. Or maybe, I don't know, but it's, what is the formal name of this plot?
Circular bar plots.
Circular bar plot. All right, gotcha.
Yeah.
All right, and I'll look for this R, you said R.
I will share you with you.
Okay.
Our
And
gallery.
Our
Our
gallery.
gallery.
Yeah.
There's lots of different.
We'll go, we'll take a look. Maybe I'll ask Chat GPT. I can't. What's type of?
And then it would just be like, I love you.
I don't know, I'm still reading them. No? Great
That's
job.
it.
Great job.
Thank you so much.
This is from someone who declared himself afraid of R.
Yes.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Luis, did you get an email from Jack?
That's all. Yeah.
You get emails from you?
Thanks,
Yes.
everybody.